President-elect Trump has nominated a Secretary of Education. Her name is Betsy DeVos. DeVos. Is she a good choice?
I think it's problematic. She never taught in a classroom. She never ran a school. She never ran a school district. Her association with education has been through philanthropic efforts and through encouraging folks in the Michigan area to contribute to charter schools and school choice voucher projects, that sort of thing.
Well, I'm curious, why is it problematic that she hasn't been a teacher or been a principal or a school superintendent? Does the person in that position have to have that experience? Why do they have to have that experience?
Well, I think that it's considered, if you go to an MBA program, they'll say, no, if you run an auto parts store and you're great at it, you can shift over and run the local bakery. I got some concerns about that with the business that I'm in, education, because it's so complicated and there's so many pieces and parts that if you don't understand it, I don't know how you're going to go about improving it. Her general theory is ideological, that schools need competition, that public schools are a monopoly, that if we bring in the competition in the form of vouchers that will help students pay for private schools, or charter schools where there's school choice for parents, then the best schools will be chosen. Well, we've had approximately 25 years of experience with that across the nation, and it hasn't shown any magical results. There have been very mixed bag, and where Betsy DeVos has been operating primarily in the Detroit area, the results are abysmal. The test scores for the Detroit public school students are the worst in the nation, the absolute worst for all the big urban areas. And a lot of that has had to do with charter school choice that Betsy DeVos has pushed. And the charter schools have produced very poor results, and there's been no accountability, no taking back of the charters, no closing down of schools. They've allowed it to be like the Wild West, and the result has been very problematic for the students there and for parents who've tried to make choices, and frequently schools have shut down, kids have moved. The public schools have been disrupted over and over again as the charter scene got more and more elaborate and complicated, and the result is not good for students.
And it's not good for students because?
Because the test scores are down, because...
why are test scores that are down, why is that bad for students? I mean, why are the test scores down?
Well, one of the ways that we measure whether schools are accomplishing what they should be accomplishing is to compare student test scores with previous years for the same students and with other students of similar demographics across the country to see whether the improvement efforts that we're making make sense. And we not only do that for the entire student population, we do it for subgroups, for boys and girls, for special education students, for ethnic minority students, for second language students. That way we can tell whether the improvement efforts we're making make sense and whether they're producing results. The results in Detroit have been awful.
Why do you think that is?
Primarily because they've allowed a number of for-profit charter schools to come in, and with no accountability, they had no reason to look really at results, and they were looking more at profits. And they were also looking more at how they could create good PR rather than good results. And the net effect has been that more children have fallen through the cracks, more kids aren't reading at grade level, more kids aren't performing math at grade level. In fact, there are some schools where none of the students are performing at grade level in math or reading.
In Detroit?
In Detroit,
specifically?
Correct. Yeah, in Detroit.
But why? So they're putting their money into public relations, and they're putting their money into
untried.
Wait.
Go ahead.
Wait. So explain to me again. Why are the test scores not improving with the voucher system in place in Detroit? Why has the voucher system had a negative impact?
Well, basically, when there's no accountability, which means there's no way that it's measured, and that those students who are doing poorly are not allowed to continue in that school. In other words, the school would close down.
How is it not measured? I thought they were measuring with test scores.
They were given the test scores, but there's no accountability, which means if the tests are given and the tests prove that the kids are not progressing, the school should be shut down. And they had promised that that's what they'd do, but they have not done that. And one of the real concerns I have with Betsy DeVos is she has lobbied strongly in favor of the for-profit schools. Now that these bad results are apparent to everyone, the legislature in Michigan is talking about putting some accountability in place, closing down some of these schools. The for-profit charter school people don't want that to happen. And Betsy DeVos has been a strong supporter of those for-profit charter schools as they lobbied to keep the accountability out. And that worries me even more. If she is,
why does that worry more?
Well, if she's amenable to evidence, in other words, if she will look at the evidence, the test scores, the student attendance rates, the retention rate, how many kids drop out of the schools and go back to the regular public schools or to another charter school, if she's willing to look at that and say, this isn't working, and shut down those schools that don't make it, that's one thing. That's a problem because the schools are failing, but at least then the schools that are failing are being addressed. If she's not willing to look at that evidence and doesn't want that evidence to be considered, that's a real bad thing.
Why wouldn't she want it to be considered?
I've read articles about how the accountability factor they've been trying to work it into the system in Michigan, and the for-profit charter schools have been fighting it every step of the way. And Betsy DeVos has been a supporter of them as they have fought this legislation that would have brought some level of accountability to what was termed in one of the news articles I read, the Wild West of school choice.
Why would they not want their schools to be accountable? Why would they not want to look at the test scores and improve on those test scores, do whatever they have to do to improve the test scores or improve the kids' student achievement, period?
Again, it's ideologically driven. Their theory is that, well, if they're doing a bad job, then parents will not select those schools. If they're doing a poor job, the parents will pull their children out of those schools and go to other choice schools. And so they're basically saying you have no obligation, the government has no obligation to close down those bad schools. I would liken that a little bit to like saying, okay, instead of having FDA approval for drugs and monitoring of drug working, we'll just see who dies, and then we'll decide, well, we better not take their pills because people that take their pills die. We don't let that happen because we know that we can't allow patients to suffer that way. The government has to intervene. This is these kids' only chance at an education. We can't let them suffer and hope that the parents realize they're getting a bad deal and pull their kids out and go someplace else.
So Betsy's basically she believes that, okay, so we're going to open a school. If your kid doesn't do well, you're just going to have to move and put your kid in another school or change the kid's school because there's choice. There's more than one school that they can choose in that area.
Right, because the corollary to the ideology that says we must have competition, school choice, parents can choose where they want their kids to go, is the Republican conservative mantra that we don't want the government interfering. We don't want government regulation. Let the parents decide. So if you're not going to have accountability where the government steps in and says, no, you can't run this school anymore, just like you were saying, you can't sell this drug anymore, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of failures by the wayside as parents try to figure out which schools to support. And particularly in this Wild West environment where there's lots of advertising, lots of promotion of various school options, whether it's vouchers or charter schools, you're going to have parents making a lot of bad choices because there's no accountability. There's no way for them to know right off the bat which schools are going to be the best. And many of these schools apparently, because parents are continuing to choose them despite poor results, have a pretty good PR effort despite the fact that they don't have very good test scores.
So it's public relations.
Yes. They're doing a better job with the public relations than they are with the actual student performance.
So,
and if Betsy DeVos is going to bring more of that to our country, that worries me. Now, in the campaign, Donald Trump said he was going to put $20 billion of federal money into student vouchers across the country. Now, vouchers are a little different than charter schools, which are publicly paid for schools that are run outside the regular school system. At least that's how they're primarily understood. There's a few examples different than that. But vouchers are where you give parents money and then they can use that to pay the tuition at the local Catholic private school or the local military academy or the local Jewish academy. The idea there being that parents will use the money to choose wisely and pick the best education for their children.
And so we're depending on parents to do that. And are these private schools any better than the public schools? I've read differently.
Well, what happens is that the private schools they want to succeed. They want to create a product that sells well. And if they don't succeed because parents are paying the tuition, the parents that they have right now are paying the tuition if it's not coming from a voucher, they have an incentive to pick the right kids for their program. So what happens is that if the wrong kind of kid shows up, and that would be a kid who has discipline problems or academic difficulties or special needs that are going to cost a lot more to serve, that kid ends up getting discouraged and ends up returning to the public schools because eventually they've been suspended too many times, they've gotten too many failing grades, they're not getting the extra support that they need, and the parents and the kids eventually get discouraged. And so a lot of those private schools have a high turnover rate, and many charter schools have the same impact where they basically select over time a group of kids that are more likely to be successful, that are cheaper to educate, and then they brag about their results, but of course they're doing that with a select clientele.
What happens to the other students that do return to the public schools? What happens to those public schools in those districts?
Well, in many school districts, the school district I worked in Albany, we frequently had students who would leave the public schools for a charter school. It didn't work out for disciplinary, academic, or special needs reasons. They would return to the local public schools, struggle some more, and then decide to try a different charter school. And it was a revolving door, and that of course is not good for the child in the end either, because nobody then gets an opportunity to really settle down and develop a program and relationships that are going to allow that child to succeed. So it frequently becomes the beginning of a train of changes.
I know in your solutions-based book, Why We Failed 40 Years of Education Reform, you talk about sorting students. Is that what you're talking about? Charter schools sort students?
Yes, if there is accountability where your school is going to get shut down or you're going to lose students if you don't improve the test scores, the charter schools have an incentive to select the student population that's going to help them to succeed. Now, the public schools have no choice. They have to take all comers, all right? The charter schools don't have to, and they're a niche business. They're just like General Motors or Ford. They don't try to sell to every customer. They try to figure out which specific customers they can appeal to where they will make money. And particularly in for-profit charter schools, that has to be their incentive. They have to look for those kids. Now, if there's no accountability, they don't worry about that. But if there is accountability for these tests and the tests could close them down, then they're pretty much driven to look for that population. And they do. Many of them don't do it through the lottery, which is the highly publicized part of getting into a charter school. They do it through the return rate, where many kids that are accepted don't make it. They find the work levels too high, the attendance expectations too much, the parent participation piece too much. There's a list of things that help those kids to be successful, and for many families, it's too much. They can't handle it.
Why is it people like Betsy DeVos, President-elect Trump, why don't they see this? Why don't they understand the concept?
Well, if you go to a well-run charter school that has done a good job of over time segregating the population that succeeds there and has the best chance of success, you can be very easily confused. You look around and you go, wow, this is great. These kids are doing wonderful stuff. They're doing a great job. Of course, those are the kids that would have done well in the regular public schools to start with, but because they're segregated, they're all together, it looks like you're doing great. Now, the statistics also tend to, at first glance, lie, because those kids are going to show up as great test scores. And since they've been pulled out of the regular public system, the regular public system's test scores are depressed because of that. If you add to that the factor that in the regular public schools, the elementary teacher who has a class of 24 kids, before the charter school siphoned off the ones that were going to succeed, if it's a high poverty school, she might have had 10 or 12 kids that really needed TLC every single day in order to have a chance of success. Once the charter schools have siphoned off the kids who had the best chance for success, that 12 or 15 might go up to 19 to 22. So her day just became impossible. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we saddle the regular public schools with more and more students who need extra help and support in order to succeed. And many of the funding formulas that drive the money from the public schools to the charter schools are skewed in such a way that they don't leave enough money at the public schools. They send too much to the charter schools, and the net effect is the classes get bigger, the number of kids in each class that need extra support gets bigger, and those teachers' test scores go down. So not only do the charter schools look better than they really are because of their segregation tactics, the regular public schools look worse because of all the extra burdens that have been heaped upon those teachers and principals as they try to do their job every day.
But again, why does Betsy DeVos and President-elect Trump, why don't they understand this concept? Why can't they see what's going on? Or are they just in denial about it? What's the benefit to them? Why?
You know, I've tried for years to help people understand this issue, and it's complex. If you see a school and it appears to be successful, you assume this is working great. And if you see another school, a regular public school, that's struggling with its student population and the test scores, you say, well, this is not working. We shouldn't do this. When they don't realize that actually it doesn't work that way, that what's happened is they've segregated the students, and that's what's creating a lot of the growth. And then the rest of the growth and the rest of the downfall of test scores in public schools can be explained by money issues, where the money isn't getting distributed properly, or by the fact that the teachers in those classrooms in the regular public schools are now so overburdened with kids who need extra help, they can't possibly make it all the way around the classroom and do what's needed.
I know it's a complicated issue, but okay, so they're looking at the public school test scores, and they're not good, so they're like, we shouldn't be doing that. But in Detroit now, we have charter schools, school choice. The test scores aren't improving there, or
they're worse.
Or worse. Well, so are we just seeing what we want to see?
No, and I think that's where we got to be realistic about this. There are ways to implement school choice in a way that can be beneficial to children, and if you want to look for two examples, New Orleans and Washington, D.C. both have school choice programs that seem to be working according to the data. It's relatively new in that it's since Katrina in New Orleans, and it's in the last 5-6 years down in D.C. But essentially what it is, those choice programs are run by the school district. So first, you're not going to steer extra money to the choice schools if you're running that school district. If you're the superintendent in New Orleans, you're not going to make sure that this school gets a lot more resources per student than that school. That would be crazy. So first off, the money's divided evenly. Second, if you're keeping track of the data on how the kids are performing on the tests and so on, you're not going to skew it so that all of the kids that would succeed end up in the choice schools, and all of the kids who would struggle are going to end up in the regular public schools. You're going to make sure they're balanced.
So explain that to me again. What's the difference between Washington, D.C. and New Orleans charter schools and the rest of those charter schools in the country?
They're being run by the school district. They're not being run by outside. They're not rogue invasive species charter schools. They don't come in and try to take over and prove the public schools wrong. They are part of the public system, and as such, they're not given extra money. They don't have incentives to take the kids that are going to succeed. The whole system is designed around the fact that we want school choice. We want to encourage it. We don't want to give them a leg up and make sure that they have the kids who will succeed and leave the others all in the other regular public schools.
Why have the other school choice states, cities, why haven't they done the same?
Well, when the school choice experiment arrived for me in Albany in 1999, I've got a quick lesson in how that works. They approved a charter school with over 400 kids. It came in June after our budget had been approved in May. We had no way to know where these kids were going to come from. It was going to open in September, and we were stuck. And I tried to convince everybody we can't really do this quickly. We won't be able to do the transportation. It's going to be a mess. But the governor wanted it. They approved it. It came through. And when I called the guy at the State University of New York that had approved, his committee, the Charter School Institute, had approved this. His name was Scott Steffi, and I said, this is really going to be a problem for us. And he said, if it hurts you, that's even better. And that is the theory behind this, that the idea is to punish the public schools that have done such a poor job of educating particularly poor urban students, and so we must punish them. Well, punishment's a bad business plan. It's not the way we should be going. What we should really be doing is looking for school choice that will help all the children and make the schools a better system.
So in New Orleans and Washington, D.C., these newly designed, do you think that they went in this direction because they saw that the other design was a failure? The charter schools that were operated outside of the system were failures?
Well, I think in New Orleans it was kind of a natural disaster that caused it to work this way. The New Orleans public school system, pretty much like much of the rest of the city, got wiped out with Katrina.
So we need a Katrina nationwide.
And when they got to restart it, they had a chance to rethink how they would do it, and they integrated a legitimate school choice program into it. Now, across the country, we've had very successful school choice programs in the form of magnet schools in urban areas before. But magnet schools kind of fell by the wayside. Their goal was desegregation, to mix ethnic minority students and white students in the same schools and help them to find success. And that fell out of vogue. But the truth is they produced decent results, good results, and they also provided choices for urban parents. As they fell by the wayside, the new Scott Steffi approach to school choice took over, particularly for Republicans and some very understandably upset liberals who said, we've had enough of the public schools, they're not serving our children well. And the Republicans who were saying if it hurts those public schools, that's even better. And the two of them banded together and created the present rogue invasive species charter school, which is not going to succeed. It's going to create the incentives that cause them to siphon off the kids that will succeed. And if they don't do that, then they'll get closed down if there's any level of accountability.
So in New Orleans, for example, the public school system is running the charter schools.
Correct.
But the difference between the charter schools in that system and the other schools is
they have their share of special education kids, just as the magnet schools that I ran in Albany had their share of special education kids. They have the same dollars per pupil that the regular public education schools have. They don't have high return rates, because if they did, that would be seen as a problem. In the present situation, return rates are not even measured in many districts and in many states. So that people don't look at the fact that, yes, you're taking in 100 kids every year, but 50 of those kids return, and over time, you've weeded this down to the kids that were going to succeed on the tests anyways.
But those charter schools in New Orleans, let's just separate out New Orleans. How is the charter school in the district? How does it operate differently than the regular public schools? I mean, what's the difference?
Okay, most charter schools and magnet schools like the ones that I ran have an instructional theme. Math, science, and technology, or an instructional approach, Montessori education, and so on.
What's the benefit of that?
Well, the advantage is if you're a parent and you're saying, I think Montessori is what my child's all about. He's hands-on, he loves to work in groups, he needs to be really active as he's learning, a lot of which is part of Montessori education. You could select an elementary school where a Montessori education is being delivered, and it would be appropriate to your child. All right? Now, that Montessori approach could be in a charter school, it could be in a magnet school. But if it's a Montessori charter school that's run as a rogue, invasive charter school coming in from outside, and it's going to be evaluated and accountable based on test scores, it has a built-in incentive to find the kids who will do well on the test and to exclude the kids who will not do well on the test. And it may take everybody in the lottery, but over time it'll return back to the regular school district those kids who are not doing well.
So there's a theme, maybe
there's an instructional approach. Yep. And
what are the other differences?
And frequently there's strong bonds with parents. The other thing is that a choice school, many parents in urban situations, poverty parents, life comes along, mom loses her job, dad has a problem with the law, whatever happens, and the next thing you know, they're living in a new apartment. Now, if they're going to the local neighborhood school, they just change schools. If they're going to a charter school or a magnet school, they continue to get bused to that school no matter where they live in the city, so that they can maintain that relationship. And so there's less chaos in their academic life, they have a better chance for success. So choices, and because parents are making a choice and so are the kids and they're committed to that choice, that means choice is a good idea.
Why can't you just slap a theme on a public school then, a regular public school, and that makes it a charter school? What's the...
You can, but then you have to, if it's truly a choice school, then you have to allow other students from outside that attendance zone to choose to come into that thing, so that people are choosing whether, if you happen to live right next door to this school and it decides to become a Montessori school, and you're saying, I don't want Montessori education. I mean, if you look at it, it's a little different. And if you said, no, I just want a regular public school approach, well, you got to have an option for that parent. Now the parents are choosing where they go. That's a good thing. Choice is a good thing. What happened here is the idea of school choice, which is a good thing, got hijacked by some politicians who had a different agenda. They wanted to punish the public schools that weren't doing well.
And anything else different? Are the teachers in unions? Are the unions, or is the school day, the length of the school day determined by the state? What?
In charter schools, the proponents of charter schools, and they are correct about this, are saying, well, if we have a charter school, we don't have to abide by all these rules. We don't have the union rules. We don't have to hire just certified teachers. We can run longer school days, longer school years. And my response to that would be, if those are good things, let's give them to all public schools. Let's make sure that all public schools have that opportunity. Now, there are some thorny issues. If you start looking at, for instance, tenure, seniority, staffing. If you run a choice school, whether it's a charter school, a rogue invasive species charter school coming in from outside, a district-run charter school, a district-run magnet school, choice schools, you should have some control over the staffing in that school. All right? You shouldn't be told as a principal, okay, this school is going to become a magnet school, but you got to take the teachers that are here, some of whom don't want to do that Montessori theme or don't want to become that kind of a teacher, and you got to make them make this work. Well, that's probably not going to work. You got to have some flexibility over staff. Now, immediately in the strong union states, they're going to say, whoa, wait a second here. You can't just push these teachers out the door. So you need a mechanism by which to do it. Our mechanism right now is all or nothing. It's basically you can't move any of those tenured teachers off to another site or have them lose their jobs. My book proposal is basically that we have a percentage of teachers that you could dismiss if they are not performing properly, and you've documented the fact that they're not performing properly, that you'd have a percentage of those teachers that you could move out to create these choice options, and that percentage would expand based on how problematic, how low the test scores are in your district. So that for those districts that are really struggling, the urban districts where very poor performance, like Detroit, you could move out a number of the tenured staff members to make room for new staff members that would give you an opportunity to initiate a choice school. If you don't have that in place, it's very hard for school districts to, on purpose, on their own, initiate charter school, choice schools, magnet schools, because they have a whole bunch of staff members who are now being pushed into something they don't want to do.
So what would you say to President-elect Trump's choice for a U.S. Secretary of Education? What would your advice to her be?
Well, first thing I'd do is say, please take the time to read my book, and in particular read chapter 6 in that book, which is about school choice and poverty, and understand the ill effects of a poorly implemented school choice program where you're allowed to see segregation of the students, to push those students who are not successful back out of the charter schools into the regular public schools, and make certain that you do no harm. That's one of the things I tried to emphasize in the book is if you're going to have a reform initiative, make sure it doesn't hurt kids. We shouldn't have kids trucking over to one school and find out it doesn't work and then trucking back. They only have one time in school, and if we waste multiple years while we're figuring out what works, that's not a good idea.
It's almost as though those people who are advocating for these rogue invasive species charter schools have never had children. Because I know I have one child, she's an adult now, but when she was 7 years old, bouncing her back from one school to another, that would not have gone over well. Some kids may be more flexible. Most of the kids I know, they want to go to a school. They want to stay in that school. They want to be successful in that school. They don't want to be pushed from one school to the next. I've never known kids that were very good at that.
Well, I read today about a mother in Detroit where Betsy DeVos has put in a lot of her time. And that mother's the parent of a third grade child, somebody who's been in school. This is his 4th year. He's now on his 5th school.
Wow.
And not only that, he's doing terribly. He can only write the first 2 letters of his name. And she's, scared to death that he's never going to learn to read and write and that he's going to get left at the gate. And he's about to go into his 2nd trip around on 3rd grade.
Why has he been to so many schools?
Because of the school choice situation there and the fact that everything is chaotic. And as the charters pull kids every willy here and there, and the school district is under tremendous fiscal pressure because they've lost millions and millions of dollars of state aid as more and more of the money has gone back out to the charters. They're closing down school buildings all over the place and consolidating kids to try to make programs work. So if you're a parent in that trying to find the best thing for your child, it's a mess. And I don't want to see that mess visited on other urban areas in the United States as Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos figure out what those of us who've worked in education know very well after years and years of experience. And that's what gets me back to, she never taught in a school, she never worked as a principal, she never worked as a superintendent. She doesn't understand the intricacies of these issues. She's approaching them from an ideology, not from a practical experience standpoint.